Hi, everybody, and welcome to the SuperFeast podcast. Today, I'm here with Dr. Amanda Waaldyk. She's the director at Angia Acupuncture and Yoga and a really well-known Melbourne practitioner who specialises in women's health and fertility. Amanda has been practicing since 2006, which is pretty impressive, especially given how young she looks. And I know that her work is really around helping women kind of navigate the complexity of what it means to have a female reproductive cycle, and when we get to fertility, childbearing years, and even beyond into menopause. So Amanda's worked through some of the best fertility experts and studied Chinese medicine in Australia and overseas, which I think is really unique because a lot of people don't actually get that experience. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And she also has a Bachelor of Health Science at the Victorian University with a focus on gynecology and musculoskeletal disorders. And Amanda also integrates this kind of TCM wisdom with the yogic wisdom, which anyone who knows me would know that that's something I'm really passionate about as well. So I'm really excited to talk about that with her today. She has a couple of little kitties and her partner, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. And also, if you guys get a chance, she has an amazing website with some great resources, ebooks, there's some free ones and some ones you can buy, and also she's coming out with a podcast, so she's a bit of a go-getter, this one. And I'm really excited to have her here today. Thanks so much for joining us, Amanda.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Super excited.
Yeah, me too. So I thought it might be interesting just to start a little bit with your background, because I obviously in your ebook you talk about your kind of journey toward health, which I find always is such a great place to start with people's interviews, just so we get some context and background. So I know you were quite a go-getter in your youth, and you've done some crazy things like marathons and stuff. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you came to be where you are now, and the kind of things that led you to your interests in women's health and fertility.
It's such a lifetime journey, and that's what I really love about Chinese medicine and yoga, is that it's a long life medicine, and we constantly keep sort of that evolutionary upgrade of ourselves, isn't it? And to have the catalyst of change that happened for me back when I was 20. I grew up in a great family, had a great family life, went to a private school, got great education, and I found myself hanging around with the wrong type of people, and I was playing state league netball and living always in the yang. Just finished uni, got into nursing, and anyway, I ended up having a drug addiction. And that was pretty traumatic, and that's what was the catalyst for change for me. I was 51 kilos and my life had gone down in an absolute spiral. I'd stopped studying nursing and was working at a stockbroking firm, and for me, I was also mentally not well, and mum got the phone call I was in an abusive relationship, and she had no idea what was going on because of course I was living out of home. And so then mum took me home, and basically I went and saw a Chinese medicine doctor, a naturopath, and Dr Ken Zhao, who's still in Melbourne and he still practices. He was my saviour essentially. And I walked into his room and I sat down, and he took my pulse and he told me what was going on with my body, because I had actually developed this funny smell, and I felt like I was literally going mental. And from that, he was telling me that my internal organs were almost at the point of collapse. And in Chinese medicine, we know this is a collapse of yin. And so from there, I fell in love with the Chinese philosophy, fell in love with the herbs, and from that moment, I was like, oh my God, I just have to study this. I just felt it in my bones. So I left his office and I went home, and I spent an entire year supporting myself, detoxing, learning how to get my body back through nutrition, through acupuncture, through herbs. And then I decided that I would go and study Chinese medicine. So didn't really look at the course or what it entailed, signed up, and before I knew it, I rocked up and I was like speaking another language, and there I was doing 4 years of herbs. I thought I was doing acupuncture. So I was like,
that's so funny.
And so literally 4 years of botanics and pharmacology and just learning the beautiful wisdom of Chinese medicine, which is a 3,000-year-old medicine.
Mm.
And from that, it was 6 years of studying, 4 years of herbs, 2 years of acupuncture. And when I finished my degree, that took me over to China, packed my bags up and went and studied in China for a year and worked through different hospitals. And that was just a real eye-opener to see how they practice, because of there's so many millions of people over there, that all the doctors have a Western medicine degree and they also have a Chinese medicine degree. So there's this beautiful interaction of the yin and yang. And I think that's when now we're seeing that we're getting this, integrative therapies, and that's where we get a lot of great results, is by combining both these old ancient healing modalities with our Western medicine and different modalities. And came back to Australia and set up my clinic, and I thought I was just going to do musculoskeletal. I'd had a really great background in sports, and from there women just started appearing at my door. It's that universe side.
Oh yeah.
And I was open, and I was open to listening, and I was like, okay, there's something in this man's. And so from there, that's sort of how my love and passion came in for women's health and for fertility. And it's been my baby, and from there it's just grown. And Angia is I feel so honored to be working under the spirit of Angia.
Could you tell us about her name, because it's such a beautiful story?
Well, I was at my girlfriend's house, and they collect a lot of Aboriginal art, and she'd been up in the Northern Territory studying secret women's business and living with the elders and learning about all the amazing things and wisdom. And we just got chatting, and she went to this sacred area where there was this beautiful lake of water, and the elders were saying that you couldn't touch this water. You had to be taken there by an elder, and if you were to touch it without the elder's presence, that things would happen. And she was allowed to touch the water, and anyway, she came home and she ended up conceiving, and she was in her 40s.
Wow.
And so from there, I was looking into, well, I wonder what the Aboriginal mythology is for fertility, and it was Angia. And so she essentially represents the fertility goddess. And so she takes away their souls in between their incarnations and buries them into the earth, into this beautiful cone-like structure with twigs and branches. And then when the mothers are ready, she takes them out and she plants them into their womb. And so essentially we just facilitate that journey. And because I think the hardest thing is that for women that are going through the fertility journey is we sort of see the baby being the end goal, right? It's like everything's focused on the baby. And what we forget is we start to forget about ourselves. And so through the journey here, it becomes a journey really about motherhood, about preparing ourselves to be a mother. And so we peel away all the different layers, the physical, the mental and emotional. And that's what I love about yoga too. It's that peeling away of the layers to reach Atman, our divine self. And so when we've passed those obstacles, peeled away those layers, and that's when the magic starts to happen, and that's when we start to be in flow with ourselves and our hormones start to align. And so there's a real spiritual aspect to my practice, and I think how the practice has grown to be so successful is because I can have a beautiful blend of the Western medicine and being able to explain things from a Western medicine perspective, but then bring in this spiritual aspect, because that's what's lacking. It's such a spiritual journey, that whole journey of conception and insemination. It's magic. And then how a baby grows inside of us, how
it's
it
one
develops.
of the last uncharted, mysterious, truly magical realms. We know so much now. We're constantly sciencing and breaking things down and reducing things, but it's like, what is this miraculous kind of thing that happens when a sperm and an egg comes together, and somehow this little being is formed through. I remember being pregnant and just being like, you guys, like, do you know what's happening inside me right now? Like, you know, there's this, and, you know, that's what I love about Chinese medicine, because, you know, we've got these concepts of Jing Qi Shen, and, you know, the Jing kind of
Yes.
holding this essence or this ability for, you know, our little embryos to become a human, like to have that capacity to know what to do and for the cells to know how to reproduce. And I think, you know, I know that's such a beautiful thing. You mentioned that a little bit in your book, and you know, I think, is that something when you're talking to women, is like trying to give them a sense that, you know, it's almost like our mama earth, like we need to nurture her in order for us to thrive. It's kind of the same thing when a woman is on a fertility journey, right? It's like learning to really connect to that, you know, that ability to nourish and care and kind of, and treat herself as a sacred space that, you know, something miraculous is about to occur within. Is that something?
Absolutely. And that's the thing, we are a temple. And as women with the Chinese, when we look at the Chinese medicine aspect, is that essentially we are yin. We are the blood. We are the jing. We are the fluids. We are the essence. And when we have that ability to really be able to learn to nourish ourselves, to honor ourselves, to connect back into ourselves, that's when we start to have those really miraculous sort of transformations. And because what we see a lot of in clinic is most of the patients that come through the doors here, we're all A-type females, we're those go-getters, we're living in sympathetic dominance.
Yeah.
We're just, you know, we're kind of living from up here. We're living from above from our heads, and we're not actually having this opportunity to be able to connect into our bodies. And we think, oh yeah, I'm just going to be able to have a baby. And when it doesn't happen, we feel like we're losing control. And so it's like, okay, how do we actually come back to ourselves? How do we come back to our original nature as women, into that divine feminine, into this sacred space? And because we've just lost that, haven't we?
Yeah.
In today's society it begins. I mean, it's like when we look at, I think they call it this 3-generational footprint, as we know that when our grandmothers are carrying our mothers, we're essentially a tiny egg in our mother's ovaries. And so that there's that big connection maternally. And so all those influence through those maternal lines then affect our fertility. And so it's really about learning to nourish ourselves, coming back to the most yin aspect. And so that's what we do here in clinic, is we peel away those layers for women and really look at it. So it's like a holistic lifestyle of, okay, what are you doing nutritionally? What are you doing with exercise? All those key factors. How do you sleep? How do you move your body? And really getting them to teach them to bring them back into that parasympathetic of rest and nest. And that's what we need. We're craving it. And like you said, Mother Earth is suffering, and Mother Earth is a creator. And as women, we are also creators too. And you know, infertility now is an epidemic, and we're seeing the evolution of more conditions such as natural killer cells. And you know, it's quite controversial within the medical, within Western medicine and the medical field. But for me, I look at it like it's very much a condition, is because our bodies are under so much stress. We're just trying to survive on a daily, and that within itself is stressful. We've got then social media, we're just on go 24/7. And so our bodies are really suffering. And being Mother Earth, you know, if we look at what we're doing to Mother Earth, she's also suffering too. And so our beautiful womb space is going. And this is what I learned in Vedic philosophy, is that we have creation, we have maintenance, and we have destruction. And right now we can't create because we're in a destructive phase. And our internal environment is suffering from this. And so what's Mother Nature saying? It's almost like a wake-up call to say, come on, we've really got to start to look after ourselves better, but we've also got to start to look after the earth better as well. So it's massive. It's, you know, it's really.
I mean, what you said then about, you know, because when it's almost that self-destruction, like I don't know, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I certainly know for myself, I have a similar story to you in terms of my youth and my behaviors, and it is a self-destructive pattern. It's like a lack of ability to cultivate, you know, the capacity to be aware enough of all of the reasons that I'm pushing myself so hard. And, you know, when you really start to examine a lot of that stuff, I do think it can be, you know, it can be too much for us to really, you know, unless we have a container. And I think that's what, you know, it's going to see a clinician like yourself, or going to have that kind of practice of yoga or meditation, or some space where we create that sacred, where we're able to really examine the kind of reasons we're pushing ourselves so hard, why we're trying so hard to keep up, why we're not willing to nourish ourselves. It's a conversation I have a lot with women, is, you know, there's this kind of external pressure that they've never really taken the time to pause and examine like what their relationship with it is. And yeah, I think as we start, I mean, certainly for myself, like I'm really grateful I took the time to do that in my late 20s, because by the time I had my daughter, I was in a pretty good place, like in terms of where I was, you know, my own power, I suppose. But it's something I talk to a lot of women, they conceive, or they're trying to conceive, and they're still in this kind of battle with themselves against their culture. And I think we have to come to a place where we can find out where our center is, and how we hold on to that through.
Absolutely.
And, you know, for me, like acupuncture is definitely a part of that. Yoga, like herbs, meditation, you know, great conversations with people like yourself and community. But yeah, I think so much of it comes down, we talk a lot about health sovereignty at SuperFeast, and I think
yes,
I kind of picked that up in your work as well, is that there's this, it's not about giving someone else power, because I feel like empowering can kind of mean that sometimes, but it's really about getting people to connect with themselves, so that it's a self-emerging kind of power. And
absolutely.
yeah, and listening to your story and the work you do, I feel like that's a thread I can really do.
And I think, yeah, it's giving women that space to be able to really kind of go re-examine and look at themselves, because it's in Chinese medicine we have the Shen cycle, and we know that we need to be able to nourish our organs, and so the mother must be able to nourish the child organ. So when the mother's not nourished, how can the mother nourish a child? And it's the same philosophy here that I bring into clinic, is that we need to look at ourselves and really start to honor ourselves and nourish ourselves through everything that we do. And having those moments of pause, it's like when we're in stillness, that's when our greatest answers arrive, don't they?
Well, I was talking to someone the other day, and she was saying, you know, all creativity comes out of basically boredom or spaciousness, you know, when we kind of hit that point where we're like, and I mean, that's certainly true for me. And I kind of had a giggle when I thought about it, because, you know, as a culture, we're often going like, why hasn't someone come up with a way to solve these problems? Like, we never stop, like we never give ourselves time to actually, you know, maybe have that insight, or to listen, or to hear. Like, you read all the traditional, you know, stories around traditional cultures, and they spent so much time just listening to their environment and being present to the trees and the plants and the animals and the stories they were telling. And I think, you know, we could probably,
it's that Taoist philosophy, isn't it, of
yeah,
coming back to our truest nature, and we are
yeah,
essentially a reflection of nature.
and
We
it's
move
the
with the
Vedas as
seasons.
well, like they, you know, all of the
Yes,
kind of ancient traditions were drawing from that wisdom, and kind of encapsulating it for us to, you know, it's all still there for us to find, which I think is so beautiful. So I mean, when you're, because I mean, I think what I really like about your work, and certainly for someone like me who's a little bit brainy and a little bit spiritual, you know, it's like it kind of, you do tend to use a lot of you know, like kind of technical language. You talk about the hormones, you know, you're not just coming from that TCM background where you're purely talking,
yes,
you know, about
yin and yang.
yeah, and liver with a capital L and all that kind of stuff.
Because, and that's the thing, you say to someone, you'll be like, oh, you've got liver chi stagnation. They're like, what the hell does liver chi stagnation? What's wrong with my liver? Is my liver there's something physiological
Yeah.
wrong with my liver? I'm like, no, we're just talking. And so I don't actually talk about a lot of the organ bodies. we would do look at clients and get them to do profiling through blood panel work, so we can see what's going on hormonally through each part of their menstrual cycle. We also do functional medicine where we need to, if we need to look at gut health, so doing all the stool samples, and really just sitting down and having women being able just to express themselves. So having that opportunity to be heard, I think is a really big one as well. Just having that space where there are no barriers and they can let down, and then really understand, because there's so much, people don't know when to have sex. You know, there's so much information out there and it's misinformation. And so that's why when I wrote the book Body Baby Ready, it was just to encapsulate my 12 years of clinical experience, and to be able to take people literally holding their hand through this book, step by step, for all the things that they need to do. And then if they've been trying for 3 to 6 months and then they're still not having any success, then there's an opportunity to explore further, to say, okay, maybe we do need to go down the route of seeing a fertility specialist. And I feel like, we're so not connected from a young age, particularly in our teenage years. And then we see this sort of like domino effect. If we don't understand our menstrual cycle, what happens when we come to our reproductive years? We have no idea. We just think, oh yeah, I'm just going to have sex and fall pregnant. And we've got no idea about the inner workings of our body. And that doesn't happen. And then it's like, oh my goodness. But then that flow on effect of disconnect then goes into when we do fall pregnant. There's such fear around giving birth and being able to connect into our babies. And from there, that flow on effect is how do we end up how is our birth experience? And from that, and so it really begins all the way back in puberty. And I think this is where the education now is so important, to really start at those grassroots for our younger generations of women, so they can start to understand their bodies and make informed decisions. And, if they do want to go on the contraceptive pill, and that they maybe go, they say, okay, I'm going to go on it for a certain period of time, but then come off. And I'm not an advocate for the contraceptive pill, but I think it also too, women need to be able to make the right decisions that are right for their bodies. And
informed
when
choice.
we're,
that's what it should come down to.
Absolutely.
I think there's certainly a trend at the moment against the pill, and I had a pretty rough experience with it. But I also, I was the 16-year-old moving in with her first boyfriend, traveling in a combi, and my mum was like, you're not getting pregnant, and I think that was a real, I can imagine that as a choice is like a good one, I was like, I'm pretty glad that I didn't have a kid at that age, and I think
well, I was the opposite. I fell pregnant at 15.
Oh my
goodness. And and I had a termination, and because I couldn't go on the contraceptive pill because I had all these side effects.
Made you quite unwell.
And mum was the same. And so from there, I had the opportunity to see a natural fertility guru who taught me how to track my cycle and understand the inner workings. And so, I've been doing that now. And to think all these years later.
Yeah, well, because my story was a little bit like the opposite. I had a really natural kind of hippie mum, and then I basically walked in one day and said, I'm moving out. I was 17. I'm going to go live with my boyfriend in his van. And she was kind of like, and I'll never forget it. She was like, okay, you're going on the pill. And that was basically it. She didn't say anything else. She was really calm about the whole thing, which I was really, in hindsight, grateful for. But yeah, she took me straight to a doctor. And I went to university the next year, and I had a male fertility. I'd studied science, so I had a male fertility doctor in biology, and he'd actually done studies on women who'd taken the pill consistently and was saying that they had lower rates of cancer and all these things. And he said, all of you women out there, you should be taking the pill every day. Don't bleed. Maybe bleed once a year if you feel like you need to. And so, being 18 and kind of probably a bit impressionable, I fully swallowed that hook, line and sinker. And I was unfortunate to not have drastic symptoms, but I didn't realize, because I was so young, I hadn't, really lived in my body as a menstruating woman for that long. I didn't know that vaginal dryness was not normal. I didn't know that having no sex drive at 18 wasn't normal. I didn't know that, being really emotional all the time and kind of depressed wasn't normal. I just kind of thought that was part and parcel of being you know, 18 and living out of home and, you know, working out life and stuff. So yeah, and it wasn't until I was probably in my mid-20s that I even was like, oh, it might be the pill. I actually think my boyfriend at the time suggested it. He was like, what if you went off the pill? And I was like, oh. And I did, and I like literally changed, my whole life changed, except I didn't bleed for 3 years. So
yeah, right.
you know, that was kind of
Post-pill
unknown. Yeah, which all the doctors are like, oh, that's normal. And I was like, really?
Yeah. Like, that
doesn't
doesn't exist.
Yeah. And having, like, I'd seen naturopaths my whole life. My mum was obviously very into alternative medicine, so that was always a part of our lives, but it really wasn't until then that I kind of went, there's something about this that isn't right, you know, and I kind of started down the rabbit hole. But yeah,
because we don't really, because that's the thing, there's that disconnect. We don't really understand what's going on with our bodies, you know. And having a little boy, he's got his hand on his willy the whole time, so there's this, they totally understand their anatomy.
Well, like, there too. Yeah,
a vagina,
it's a lot harder to see a vagina. You gotta like do some yoga.
Well, that's right. And it's also too, we don't really explore.
Well, that's something I think, because that's, I mean, when I started studying Taoism, and there's this huge emphasis on, you know, the vaginal cultivation, you know, cultivating sexual energy using jade eggs and all this stuff, and suddenly it's like, you know, oh, like this is, you know. And then my partner and I were studying, like, there's a woman called Sherry Winston, and she does this great book on female anatomy for men and women to kind of work on together, and so we were looking at all that, and, you know, starting to get a sense of, you know, this is a really important conversation to be having as a couple. And, you know, I think it's just stuff that, you know, like you say, it should be done much, much earlier. I mean, I do remember kind of like being shown a vagina at school, but I don't really remember clocking it. I was like, yeah. But yeah, I think it's just one of those things. But I also, my yoga teacher talks about facilities, like when you become a teenager, all of your sexual karma kicks in. And so he's like, it's a very tough time to have a kind of educational conversation with a young person, because they're not really listening, you know. They're kind of like,
no, that's
no, but I'm just feeling stuff and I have to do something about it, you know. So
but it's
I
also
think
too, yeah, it is, isn't it? Like, as parents now, and having young daughters, it's really just, it is normalizing that, you know. Winnie's like, oh, you're bleeding at the moment, Mum. You've got your period. Oh, are you using a tampon? She's like, what's this? It's a pad. She goes, oh my God, it's a nappy. Don't worry, darling. We actually
were like nappies in the 90s.
That's right.
But I think, like, my daughter goes to daycare, and her daycare lady, it's like a family daycare, so there's just 4 of them, and she's like, look, they all see me with my tampons and my pads, and they all know about, you know, my bleeding. And I'm like, great, like, I'm really open to, you know, my daughter being around women that are comfortable about, you know, that being a part of their day-to-day flow, you know. It's like, that's how it works. And I think, I mean, I collect my blood and pour it on our pot plants, so, you know, I don't know what my daughter's going to think growing up, but she thinks that's totally normal. So
I just started.
Yeah, it's really good fertilizer, you know, if nothing else.
Oh, absolutely.
But also for biofeedback, you know, like when my period came back after my daughter stopped breastfeeding, I was just like, I couldn't believe how happy I was. I was like, this is such an amazing gift that you know, we get this monthly kind of opportunity to be with our bodies. And I don't think I'd had that full appreciation until after my daughter was born. I think that was the first time, you know, I'd sort of been in a theoretical place, like respecting my period and my body and whatever, but like I think that was the first time I had this really emotional like connection. Yeah, which I was like, wow, that's such a, I think birth obviously maybe takes us there. And I know you had 2 kids and had some pretty big adventures, right, with your children? Because I saw your pictures. Yeah. So do you mind sharing a little about your birth stories? I love birth stories. You don't have to go too deep if it's too much.
No, it's not. Like, the thing was, I mean, working in the field that I do, the importance is that, you know, it's really about the future generations of our children. And so really being able to know how to care for ourselves in a holistic manner really affects us, it affects our children, and particularly in utero and leading up to conception, the beautiful Jing. So in Chinese medicine, we know that the oocytes and the sperm, they're our Jing, and when we conceive, we're 50% DNA from both our mother and father. And so if we're not looking after ourselves before we fall pregnant, that's going to affect the way that we conceive. And as we come back to that sort of 3 footprint generation, is that our story really begins in the womb. And so now leading up to motherhood is that we have a big responsibility, and so we want to really be looking after ourselves in that holistic aspect, from everything, how we think, eat, because that's going to affect our future generations of our children. And so for me, the whole conception journey was really a preconception journey. You know, when I had fallen pregnant, I had a blighted ovum, and prior to that, I was just training like a mad woman. I was sitting here and I was telling women of all the things that they needed to do, but I actually wasn't practicing what I preached. And I was just living in this yang dominant lifestyle and this sympathetic dominance. And I'd been training, riding 600 Ks a week. And so after that bike ride, we were lucky enough to conceive. But when I went for my scan, there was a blighted ovum. And for me, that was one of those light bulb moments. It was like, man, do you know what? You can't actually be doing everything, trying to be superwoman, because it's not sustainable. There's no maintenance in that. And it was a real time for introspection. Like you said, having that stillness and space to be able to reflect on, okay, what do I actually need to, even though nutritionally I eat well and I exercise, but how can I nourish a child when I wasn't nourishing myself? So it was to take a step back and really step into that yin aspect of slowing down and, doing meditation and having a regular yoga practice and doing more self-care practice. And so we did that for a year, and it was introducing, I was doing bone broth, but swapping, and I was still drinking coffee, and swapping the coffee for bone broth. And that has a massive impact. In Chinese medicine, it's the marrow. And as you know, with SuperFeast, it's the Jing.
Yeah.
It's the essence, and this is the essence of life, how the Jing is what creates life. That is when we conceive, that beautiful moment of insemination. It's the Big Bang Theory. And from that, if we don't have healthy eggs or healthy sperm, chromosomally, there's so many things, epigenetics, genetically, there's so many things that can possibly go wrong. So we want to make sure that we're giving ourselves the best opportunity before we start. And so had a really wonderful pregnancy. Actually, it was wonderful, right? I bled for the first 17 weeks. I had a massage. I had a massage when we found out, and the massage table broke, and I fell and I hit my belly, and I started to bleed. And this was after the blighted ovum, and I just went, look, I was realistic. I'm like, if it's going to be, it's going to be, and if it's not, well, we'll deal with that. And we came back to Melbourne and we had a scan, and there was a beautiful heartbeat, and I'm like, yes, they're a fighter. They're staying.
Yeah, that's amazing.
They're here to stay. And then bled for 17 weeks. And so that was just, that, and this is the thing, there's so many hurdles and challenges we have to overcome in our fertility journey. And I was on tenterhooks. I was going in for scans all the time. I was literally doing nothing. And I was, at that time as well, I was doing my yoga prenatal teacher training. So I had to stop halfway through because it was just too much. And so we got to 17 weeks and the bleeding stopped, and then it was just, like that second trimester when you're just in absolute abundance. And that's not always the case for every woman, and thriving. And so by the time we got to 38 weeks, I'd gone into labour. So I woke up one evening, my waters broke, and by the time I got into the hospital, 6 centimetres dilated, and 3 hours later, Winnie was born in a nurse.
Dream.
And it was a dream. It was a dream. For me, it was a dream pregnancy, even though It's just your perspective, really, isn't it, on how you look at things. After I'd given birth, they put her on my tummy, and then she made her way up. She
crawl.
the crawl, latched on, and just that, you know, whole natural process. And so she was a beautiful, healthy baby, and you know, we'd always eaten organic foods where we could. And then when she was 1, she contracted pneumonia, and the pneumonia ended up attacking her kidneys, and she developed hemolytic uremic syndrome. So we were in hospital just going, oh my goodness, like it was literally life and death, and just sitting in this space of going, this is like a non-reality. Oh my goodness, like what are we going to do here? And totally out of our control. And she's a little fighter.
Oh, and that already, yeah. Oh my gosh.
Thank goodness she pulled through, and you know, as a result, she's got chronic kidney disease now. But her road to recovery, I honestly, when I look back, I put it back to all the hard work, all that preconception care, because hemolytic uremic syndrome attacked her kidneys. And we know the kidneys in Chinese medicine, it's the life force. It's where our constitution, where maturation, sexual reproduction, all of that comes from the kidneys, and from a TCM perspective. And so we've done a lot of work with naturopaths and Chinese medicine to get her to a place now, and specifically through diet, just healing her gut from all the antibiotics she had to be on. So really lots of coming back to the broth, the bone broth, the marrow, that whole
healing
gut. Healing, and she's in prep, and she's a little fighter. She's a go-getter. And I honestly put it back to that moment of that preconception care. That's why her recovery has been, and that's why I say in clinic it's so important what we do now, therefore affects our unborn child, and then can affect our children in later years as well, because you know, sometimes we have underlying conditions, and all it takes is an epigenetic through a lifestyle way that we're living that can switch on those genes. So we do need to come back to that place of really understanding and looking after our bodies, coming back to how we treat nature, is how we want to treat ourselves. Our bodies are a temple. You know, we only do have one opportunity in this lifetime. And then so I got home from hospital with Winnie. She got home, when was it? It was just sort of it was October, beginning of October, sort of middle of October. So she was in hospital for 2 months. And at that time I was pregnant with Freddie. I was 26 weeks pregnant when it happened. And so by the time we got out of hospital, 2 weeks later, I'd had a kinesiology session and my waters broke. I was in the kitchen. And we went into hospital because I'd only had a precipitated labour with Winnie. They were thinking, right, well, you're going to come into hospital as soon as your waters break. And Freddie was born on the 25th of October. So we'd literally 2 months in hospital, home for 2 weeks, back into hospital. He was born at 33 weeks. Little preemie. So this time we're totally used to the hospital system. We were, you know, Winnie was doing kidney dialysis. We're like, okay, we know how to use the machines for kidney dialysis. And thank God she didn't end up having to have dialysis at home. She was able to start urinating again. So we know that the filtration of her kidneys, she could start to function again. And so when Freddie was born prem, I was also breastfeeding at that time. I was expressing for Winnie, because of all the nutrients that we know that breast milk contains to try and get her immune system back up. So breastfeeding for Winnie and then feeding for Freddie. So it was just absolute madness. But as mums, you know, you just do what you do.
Life,
And so we can, and that's the thing. It's like, if we don't look after ourselves leading into our fertility journey, into our pregnancy journey, and then we're struggling postpartum, is that we go into that that postnatal depletion syndrome. And so everything we do has that domino effect, affects us through all our different stages, and menopause too.
Well, that's what I'm saying. And you never know the reserves you're going to have to dig into. Like what you've just described is like, you couldn't have planned for that, but by knowing that you have this, strong kind of relationship with nourishing and caring for yourself, you're able to really find the, resources when you need to. And I think for me, like preconception care was something we were really conscious of. We were doing a 2-year protocol, which ended a year early because we got pregnant unexpectedly.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. So we didn't, I read your fertility thing and I was like, wow, I forget like how complex, because when it happens, like my dad, he always jokes like the only people that like think it's hard to get pregnant, like the ones that are sort of planning and always trying, is like everyone else is like having accidents. So it's kind of this weird thing where it's like you're either like, fuck, I just can't not get pregnant, or you're like, please, I just want to get pregnant. And there's this kind of just this weird like, and it's just a funny thing. So we were in the, oh my god, this was a bit ahead of schedule kind of camp. But like I'd done a year of prep and I was kind of feeling really good, and yeah, it was a really interesting thing to just see how easily I transitioned through that postpartum time despite having a lot of pressures. But I was just like, I was so amazed at like the level of like internal resource you need to to like produce breast milk, which is blood, right? And I'd been a vegetarian for 14 years prior to that, and I sort of started eating meat just around our preconception thing to like re-nourish myself. And yeah, I was like, oh, I'm so glad I did that. And I was just imagining like all of the things that like if I hadn't, I was like, oh, there's so many possibilities for things to go haywire if you're.
And that's the thing, like in clinic, it's having a I really respect people's choices that they have, and if they are vegan, it's having the conversation of really going, okay, we really need to look at the aspect of, so through the bloods you can see that there's a history of anemic, or iron stores are low, and then gut health. But it's really saying we need to look at this holistically, because food is medicine. And whilst you are vegan, is that you're just not getting enough of your essential fats. And we know essential fatty acids help for reducing inflammation in the body. They're also essential for reproduction for our sex hormones. So they're essential. And when we're vegan, we're just not getting necessarily all our forms that we need through the foods that we eat, and everything serves a purpose. But sometimes when we're coming to our fertility journey, is that just maybe in this time in your life is that being a vegan is just not going to support you for this time. But not to say that after you've given birth that you can't go back to that, but each person is uniquely different. And that's the hardest thing. I had a client, and they'd been trying for 4 years, and they weren't having any success. And we went through their diet, and she was a vegan. And I said to her, look, how do you feel about this, baby or vegan? It's kind of like we've got two on the plate here. And she said to me, I'm sorry, I can't do it. I can't actually eat meat. And I was like, I would never want you to eat meat, but I want you to understand is that by just having the broth, the bone broth, the marrow, the jing, the essence, this is what helps formation of healthy oocytes, our eggs. It helps the formation of healthy sperm, is that we need this essential jing. It's the essence of our life. It's the essence for your child. And so sometimes you are going to meet resistance, but I think that when you can back it up with the science, and then also you can explain why they need to potentially be having this, that they are most willing to, bend a little. And I see it all the time.
Yeah.
Women will go, actually, you know what? I see that I'm actually undernourished, and we can see that in our periods. We can see through our blood flow. We can see what else was I going to say? I've lost my thoughts there.
See if
Oh,
it
and
is
so
like, well, I think, I mean, what I observe a lot is it's almost, and my acupuncturist talks about this actually. He's like, and I don't know your thoughts on this, I'd be curious to hear, but he says when someone's blood is so depleted, they can't actually change out of their ideology because their shen can't kind of, their shen's kind of weak, you know? So he's like, they actually can't change into this new idea pattern of
there's no
like,
reserves.
yeah, being able to turn a habit around or like come out of an ideological pattern. And I mean, when I heard that, I was like, holy shit, I feel like that's, because it was like literally from about my mid-20s, I knew that I should eat meat, like as in terms of what my body knew, but what
Yeah.
my mind knew was like something really different. And it was this constant thing where anytime I meditated, anytime I did plant medicine or any kind of spiritual work, I would get this message like, you need to start eating meat. And I would just crack up because I'm like, I'm meditating, like you're telling me to be a vegan, you know, or like ahimsa, right? And I was like, this is just not like, it's just such a funny thing. It's like anytime I feel meat, it's like go and eat blood. And anytime I think about it, I can't reconcile that. And yeah, when he said that, I was like, that makes so much sense to me anyway.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I see that with ideology
Because
in any form, right? Because, you know, yeah, were you going to say something to that quickly? Or?
oh yeah, so the shen relates to our blood. It's the heart, and so if we're absolutely depleted, that's it. Like, how can we actually shift our ideology? Because it's like we just get stuck. We're completely there's no shift. There's no room for that transformation because you're just in this place of depletion, and you can't. Your psyche, you just can't actually think properly, in a sense.
No, and I think that's like when I think about how that relates to the menstrual cycle, it's like we're shedding blood and we have this opportunity to create new blood and to create new thoughts and ideas and to open up to something new. And I was talking to Lara Owen, and her work is all around how menstruation is a psychic portal. You know, if we create the space for ourselves before we bleed, when that opening occurs and that sort of transition occurs, we're able to really access, you know, insight and wisdom for our own lives and maybe for our culture or our community. And yeah, I was like,
absolutely.
Oh, yeah, we've just lost
it's that introspection, isn't it, of that yin time, because as we know with our menstrual cycle, we have these hormonal fluctuations. We have estrogen and we have progesterone, and from a TCM perspective, the estrogen in that first part of our cycle when we're menstruating is that we're losing our essence, we're losing our blood. And so within this time, the yin time is about nourishing, it's about slowing down. So it ties in with that whole, actually, let's just slow down. I'm not going to do anything today. It's like I always say, what's my internal inventory? Hand on heart, hand on womb. What do I need today? Okay, what does my body need? I'm actually just going to take some time out. I'm going to sleep in this morning. Do I really need to get up and exercise? No, I'm bleeding. I'm going to take that time for introspection. I'm going to do some journaling. And within that, that's when our wisdom starts to come through, because it's that time of stillness, that yin time. And then when we come into our follicular phase, is that we're really starting to build the yin, which reflects our estrogen. And this is a time for growth, a time for abundance, where we're growing our endometrial lining. The yin is starting to nourish. It's nourishing our body physically, mentally, emotionally. And it's like, I describe this time as our angel wings. It's a time where we really come out and we have our ideology and we're creative, because it's our womb. You know, we're building the yin within our womb in Swadhisthana. Things are starting to be in flow. And then when we come into that transition, which is a blood time in Chinese medicine, and the luteinizing hormone that releases, because, you know, we recruit a dominant follicle for ovulation, and that change in the luteinizing hormone, that's the essence of the yang. So where the yin converts into the yang. And then when we have that rise in temperature, the progesterone and the corpus luteum producing the progesterone, that's our yang phase. And that's a time, you know, from a TCM perspective, it's like we're yang in nature, we're more energetic, but when there's a hormonal imbalance, such as when we see those sort of like PMS symptoms, your breast tenderness, changes in hormones with acne, bloating, we know that there is a hormonal imbalance there between the yin and the yang. But I think it's also too now is that we are so undernourished and just so depleted, and our nervous systems are just in overdrive all the time, is that coming into the luteal phase, as I described for women that are trying to conceive, this is a time of nourishing our bodies even more. It's not about a time about going out there and, you know, pounding the pavement, running. Our womb is sacred, and we need to honor that.
And you spoke about, I mean, oh, sorry to interrupt. You spoke about your own transition from being like someone who did a lot of yang exercise in terms of, you know, running and training and all these kinds of things. And that's certainly a trend I see a lot, like, I guess like all the kind of CrossFits and the, you know, like the hardcore go kind of high intensity stuff. And I mean, I've observed in my own body that this was the biggest trip for me. I went and did a yin yoga teacher training about 6 years ago, and I spent a month training with Paul Grilly. I didn't do any normal exercise except for like a dip in the pool every day and a walk to the massage parlor. And all I did was yin yoga, and I lost so much weight. Like my muscles were so defined. I was doing handstands with no effort. I was like, what the fuck? I've done absolutely nothing. Like literally nothing. I lay around on a mat, like I don't know if anyone's done yin yoga. It's like, I call it slug yoga. You just kind of like flop around, you know? And it's like, I love it. And I was like, that blew my mind, because it couldn't, but it made so much sense. Like
because your body's had time to repair, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. And it was like it wasn't holding any inflammation or fluid because it had time to really like process everything. My digestion was better because I wasn't flogging myself and eating on the run. And you know, I was just like this whole that literally changed how I related to my everything. But I remember just thinking that was incredible. And I used to see women all the time. They were training for fitness competitions, and they'd come to my yoga classes and their bodies were like just so tight, and they weren't bleeding, and they were struggling to conceive, and they were kind of, you know, and they were eating like a portion of chicken, a portion of this and a portion of that. And I was just thinking, like, what have we done to ourselves that this is, you know, where's the like, oh, I feel like chocolate today, or I feel like
that's right. Where's the intuitive eating gone?
And this, you know,
and the like, self-love and the self-worth of, you know, I actually deserve to have a piece of chocolate today,
and to feel nourished
and to have whatever we want. And we've lost that with our society. It really is backwards in the sense, you know, I think you and I were talking earlier, weren't we, about the whole fad dieting, like the Atkins and the lemon juice dieting and
which is now like basically juice fasting and keto, right? Like this is what I keep my every time I look back over history, I'm like, okay, so high carb was there, and now it's kind of like the fruitarian vegan thing. And then we had like so that was high carb, low fat. That was like sort of 80s, 90s. And we had like the kind of Atkins, which is now keto. It's basically the same thing, lots of fat, lots of, you know, protein. Maybe keto is more fat than protein, but you know, and you know, then we see like we had the vegetarian hippie kind of folks. Now we've got like the vegans. It's just like we're just constantly reinventing the same ideology. Yeah. And we go back to like, you know, Taoism or TCM or even like the yogic stuff. It's, you know, it's like plants that are growing in an appropriate climate for where you live, kind of seasonal, you know, a little bit of meat nutritionally. Like that's a big myth I think about yoga, is that there wasn't meat in like Ayurveda. It's in there, like it's in there for Vata people, which I'm it's in there for you know, certain times in people's lives, you know, so yeah.
It's
anyway,
and I think we just need to, and that's the thing, women just need to know that they don't need to be on these crazy diets, is that when you are supporting your body with all the right foods nutritionally, is that everything starts to operate. You know, our endocrine system is it's a positive feedback system. So when we're feeding it positively, then everything's going to be homeostatic. We're going to be in homeostasis. Everything's going to be balanced. But instead, we put our body through so much through so much just by not eating the right foods and going on these crazy diets and then just depleting ourselves even further. So, which then creates more hormonal dysregulation, more hormonal imbalance. And then we're kind of left to pick up the pieces, and then it's going back to reestablishing all those really great habits again of looking after yourself.
And I think the longer term vision, because I see like literally every expert I've spoken to is basically like, if women aren't looking after themselves in their reproductive years, their menopause is going to be shit. Like they're going to have a rough time. And it's basically, again, comes down to, we've put ourselves through all this adrenal stress, we've depleted our blood, we've, kind of taken from ourselves. And then it's like, we expect this transition to be easy. Well, it's not going to be. That's generally what I've heard and seen.
Well, no, absolutely.
In clinic. Yeah.
We're the same in clinic, is that if women are not eating right, they're in adrenal fatigue, their periods they're not having a proper menstrual flow. So one of the key things that we do ask in clinic, our periods are essentially like our fifth vital sign, or as you say, like your monthly report card. And it can tell us so much about what's going on with our menstrual health. And for us, that is a big indicator in Chinese medicine, is that we ask you about your flow. What's the quality of your blood like? Do you have any blood clots? How does your period start off with? Does it start off as a beautiful, healthy, fresh red flow, or does it start off brown? Do you experience any pain with your periods? And because blood is key. It is the yin, it is the essence, and it is the thread. It is the thread to all our maternal lines. And then, as we know, that when we do go through menopause, is that our ovaries stop producing estrogen, and essentially that's when our reproductive system shuts down, and we move into those wisdom years, as I like to call them, the queen years. And in Chinese medicine, we have the 7-year cycles. So we have these major transitions through our 7-year cycles. 7, we grow our wisdom teeth, not our wisdom teeth, we grow our teeth, sorry. That's a 21. That's a 21.
A smart
fully developed child.
Yeah,
little genius.
You've got your 14 menarche, your 21 wisdom, 28 7 body returns.
That's right.
Me. But I've heard that men have an 8-year cycle in TCM. Is that?
Yeah, that's right. Men have an 8-year cycle. And I mean, the thing is, in clinic, we're seeing a lot of women at 42 having babies. And so you can see the importance of really having to look after yourself, because if you're having a baby at 42 and then you're breastfeeding, you're having all these late nights, and 7 years later you're heading towards your menopausal years, is that there is so much work that needs to be done. Because how are you going to support a toddler when at 49, 50, if you're under adrenal fatigue, you're not sleeping well, insomnia, and these are all the things that we start to see in menopause. Is, you get all your night sweats, we're totally depleted, vaginal dryness, insomnia, and so it just has this cascade effect. And that's I'm 42 now, so I'm coming up to 42, and for me it's really about heading towards 50. For me, and supporting myself through the next 8 years. And for me now, it's like really going into a meditation practice. Like I have a meditation practice every day. It's a non-negotiable, 20 minutes twice a day. Pulling back, having a regular yoga practice, but then also too nutritionally. And I know that you've spoken with Dr. Carrie Jones, and I'm just about to do the Dutch test, so I can actually see hormonally where I need to actually be working on the areas that what are my DHEA levels like? What's my estrogen like? We've got breast cancer. Mum's passed away, so there's breast cancer in our family, ovarian cancer, mum had. So it's a really important time to look at all those markers and see what I can actually be doing better, and what I need to be cutting out of, where I can supplement. So
I love that.
I can go into my menopause feeling amazing. Like I feel great now, but it's taken us a long time to get to that. But because I think, you know, I've spent 20 years really kind of not trying to master the art, but learning how to nourish myself daily. And, you know, food is a major one of that, because it's essentially, we are what we eat, and we know that that impacts our hormones, it impacts our mood. It's the way that we make blood. It's a way that it affects our positive hormonal feedback system. So food plays so much of a part of that. And so really looking at organically, because we don't want to be putting all these toxins. You know, our hormones are a lock and key receptor, and with all these phytoestrogens and the BPAs, they start to it's frightening, because they lock onto that receptor, and then they start to create that hormonal imbalance.
I was talking to a bee guy the other day, and he was talking about this niacinamide that they put on every seed now, so that they don't get eaten. It's like basically a pesticide or something, and he was saying it's killing bees, and it's poisoning all the water, and I'm like, and we're getting it now, and I'm like, oh, you may. But, you know, I think it's like this, like every piece of clover in Australia, apparently its seed is coated in this stuff. So and the bees will eat the clover, and then we're eating the honey, and it's this kind of crazy thing.
That's why fertility is in crisis. Like when you look at that, of what we've done to our environment, and then what we're actually ingesting, it's like, no wonder we've got these you know, autoimmune conditions, because the body is struggling so hard just to be able to maintain itself. And then you try to
its environment, you know, like in this constant state of inflammation. I think, you know, we're really, I mean, some of the things, like Mace always said to me when we first, like one of the things he taught when we first got together that I loved, it was like, he's like, if you're not doing it in 20 years, you know, why are you doing it now, kind of thing. Like, you've got to always have this long view. And I mean, obviously there are exceptions to that. I'm not going to have a baby in 20 years, but you know, like, you know, in terms of like these practices or these touchstones of our health. And I think for us, it's always like the best water we can get, you know, the best food we can get in the moment. You know, I've always subscribed, ever since I read it, like Michael Pollan's Eat Food, Not Too Much, Mostly Plants. And I saw that in your book too. And it's like, you know, these are really simple foundations, you know, trying to stay as much in touch with the rhythms of our seasons and nature and circadian rhythms. It's like they're not complicated things. And it's like, they're not trendy either, because it's like, they're so simple and they're free. And it's like, well, you know, food isn't free, but you know, like you can,
but you can grow your own too.
You know? And you can kind of like, even if it's something, you know, as simple as like, I mean, I think about what people spend their money on. I'm like, people spend all this money on like clothes and stuff which are covered in chemicals, and it's like, go buy some good food. You know, it's like such a engage with that cycle, whether it's through a farmer or through your own, you know, soil in your yard or whatever. So I mean, I think I've always, you know, I grew up certainly with the food as medicine, and then the kind of next stage was always herbs, and you know, we kind of go on. And then, but I love, one thing I love about your story is that willingness to kind of use the support of Western medicine. And I think one thing I find is a little challenging for me in Byron is there's this rejection of the hospital system and the kind of, you know, and I think there's a lot of people trying to do really good work within a kind of a challenging system. And also there's so many benefits, like it's such a blessing to have what we have. So I think we always have to hold this, like Mason talks about, you know, holding these two opposing ideas all the time. And that's something
it's the duality. There's that duality of yin and yang, and when we integrate, you know, I am all for Western medicine. I can be a hippie, but it definitely has its place, and particularly when it comes to, you know, reproductive technologies and things like cancer.
And even like just supporting, like, you know, what I love about TCM is how it can support someone through something like IVF, or, you know, if someone does have an intervention of some kind, you know, like all the time, like we sell medicinal mushrooms, and a lot of people want to use them for things like tumors.
I love them.
Yeah, right. And they're incredible.
We've got them in clinic because we all need, the thing is, we all need extra
well, that's the thing that I love. And I really, that took me a long time, because coming from a mum who was very much like, no, food is enough. I remember having huge fights when I first met Mason, because I was like, people don't need extra shit, like they just need to eat well. And he's like, darling, the food isn't good enough anymore. He's like, the minerals aren't
That's
there.
right.
The soils don't have fungi in them anymore. They're depleted. They're like, you know, and I was going like, no, but you know, I've come full circle and I've realized that we do need these things. And you know,
And that's why we have your supplements in
yeah,
the clinic
totally.
as well for all our vegans as well. It's like,
Well, that's
let's
the
just
thing.
nourish
Anything
you
that
with
can
yin in
support,
other ways.
yeah, a
That's
little bit of
right.
extra help. It's like so amazing. But you know, I love when I hear an oncologist like refer someone to us. Like that just, I'm like, because you know, like mushrooms work great with chemo. Like they can help clean up the radiation, they can help support the immune system, they can help, you know, if that's where you need to go. Like,
Absolutely.
but that's my biggest thing is like, how do we integrate it and complement each other? And that's what I love so much about your work. And you know, I even saw on your site you have like yin yoga for fertility, which I loved. And so I know you do like trainings and workshops and classes around that. So can you tell us a
Yes.
little bit about that? Because I mean, that for me was like such a great, I'm like, that's such a beautiful fusion, I think, you know.
Well, I mean, the stats are that 1 in 6 couples are, you know, struggling with fertility challenges. And when I was going through my own fertility challenges as well, I was doing yoga, but I was like, I wonder if there's any fertility, yoga for fertility. And I went over to America and I studied with Brenda Strong. She had developed her own style of fertility yoga, which works on specific poses, and we work on acupressure points, helping to promote blood flow to the reproductive organs, helping to balance our hormones. And of course, most of all, we know that the research shows that yoga helps to reduce stress. And Alice Domar has done a big study in the States, and they've found that women that are having fertility challenges, if they do engage in some form of yoga, that it can increase their chances of falling pregnant. Because essentially yoga, as we know the philosophy, it's working on the endocrine system, our chakras, which are our energy wheels. And in Chinese medicine, the energy is the qi. So we want to make sure that the qi is flowing freely through our body, because when it doesn't, that's when we see the physiology and the physiology starts to change, which then changes the pathology, and that's when disease arises within our body. And so by doing yoga, it gives us an opportunity to be able to connect into breath, and breath relates to our parasympathetic. It slows our nervous system down. And so by doing this, slowing down, then the body can start to repair and heal. And when it's in this state, that's when we start to really sort of see the benefits. The body can start to repair itself physically, mentally, and emotionally. And so the fertility yoga, I've teamed up with another awesome chick, Phoebe Cole. And so we started fertility in yoga because we knew how much women needed this. And as you call it, the sloth yoga, I love it. Sloth yoga.
Yeah, it's actually even worse. Sloth's probably nicer. I just remember looking around and I was like, it looks like a car crash or something. There's like people flung all over the place and they're like unconscious, and like, this is such a funny thing to teach. But anyway,
it's like you just go into that space, don't you, of absolute samadhi, into
sweet surrender.
That sweet surrender, and so for us, we really want to start to we use a lot of qigong and pranayama and Chinese medicine, and of course the beautiful philosophy of yin. And because our body's a communication system, and so the yin yoga allows us to, when we're in this space, we allow the nadis or the meridians to be able to open. And when they're open and the qi and the blood is flowing, that's when the fascia begins to soften and the communication network opens up, and we start to re-establish positive feedback. It's like a neurotransmitter. Those neurotransmitters start to fire, and the body essentially, as we know in yoga and TCM and in Western medicine, is just about maintaining homeostasis. And so through doing that, we do a lot of fascial releasing as well. We use fertility bowls, acupressure points, and getting women to connect into their heart space. The heart connects into the womb, and we call this the Bao Mai in Chinese medicine, heart to womb connection. And in yoga, we call it Swadhisthana, the second chakra, which relates to the water element. It controls our reproductive organs. And so we want to make sure that everything's in flow, and the liver meridian comes up, it circulates around our reproductive organs, it comes up, circulate, and then meets it finishes at our breasts. And so the liver meridian, it's one of those other organs, it's a wood element. It likes to be soft. It likes to be in flow. And so as we know, when we're not in flow, things stagnate. And that's what we call in Chinese medicine that liver qi stagnation. So, you know, symptoms that you would see if you do have liver qi stagnation. So you can have that breast tenderness. And what happens when we have breast tenderness in our menstrual cycle leading up to PMS, because we know that the liver has to detoxify our hormones. And so you start to see there's all these interconnections of where you're feeling things and experience things relate to organs, and they also relate to the meridians. And Chinese medicine, the womb is called the women's palace. I mean, what beautiful explanation. A palace to house our babies. And, you know, the podcast that we're starting, we're calling it the Lady Palace, because we want to bring awareness into women, to get them to understand their bodies, to create this awareness, to connect in, because this is the mysterious past. You know, this is where we create life, but where our creativity is born from, and just allowing things to come back to that and have that essence and be in flow. Because we know women are great. We have great ways of navigating that and knowing that when we're not in flow, because you feel it, you're just disconnected. You're like, I don't want to be near anyone, or we start to make, you know, choices that don't really serve us because we're not in flow. And, you know, those days that you wake up and you're like, whoa, I can take on the world. That's when we're in flow. That's like, oh, the nadis are open, the meridians are open, the hormones are in balance. And that's what I love about acupuncture. It's like you put it in, you're generating the chi, the energy, the qi, and with that, it's like a signal, like a neurotransmitter. You're sending a signal to different parts of hormones and within the brain, different aspects of the brain, to create change. And that change is to bring the body back into homeostasis. So if you align all that in your fertility journey, bringing everything back into flow, bringing the body back into homeostasis, that's when we can start to, you know, really, the body's working. It's like, it's doing its thing. And that's why we need all this. We need the extra assistance. We need the supplements. We need, you know,
the practices.
We need the acupuncture. We need the herbs, because our bodies are essentially in a crisis. The environment's in a crisis. We're in a crisis. And
that Taoist philosophy of like macro and microcosms, you know, where galaxy, each cell is like a little kind of galaxy, and, you know, it's like you can spread it all the way out to the universe and take it all the way down to like the tiniest part of us. And, you know, you look at even atoms spinning, it's like, you know, planets. So I think it's this beautiful, you know, like when we kind of think about it in that sense, like, well, what's happening in the earth? Well, that's happening inside of us. And if we want to change our society, it starts here. Like, and that's one of my favorite things about yoga and TCM is it's like, stop putting it out there and like trying to fix what's going on out there. Like, start here, like learn to be present, learn to feel, learn to face your bullshit, because that's a big part of it. You know?
It is.
And then, you know,
as
and we start to like,
exactly.
And I mean, that was for me, that was one of the things my yoga teacher taught us, is like, you know, that we're in this kind of perpendicular plane to the horizon, right? So we're like, our energy is constantly in communication with the universe and with the planet, and if any of those things get disconnected, and that's what I always see with women who are infertile, is there's a lot of heat and energy up here, and they're quite cold and kind of blocked down in their I hope this makes sense, but down in their kind of pelvic region. And so it is like things like yin and things like acupuncture and things like even our meditation practice or our awareness of starting to learn to circulate and restore that kind of flow of energy through the body, because it's something in TCM, or in at least the Tao stuff I've been taught, is like, you know, we really want to be quite warm down here, but or down in our lower dantian, and then quite cool up here in our head. And so I think our culture really inverts that, which is
it's totally it's
than ideal. Yeah. Yeah, so we're constantly in this battle of like, yes, we need the mind to function in our jobs, or, you know, when we're having these kind of complex interactions with a capitalist kind of quite masculine thinking based culture. But then, you know, when do we have this introspective time, or this time to like drop down into our lower roots of ourselves and really start to feel? And yeah, we can talk about Muladhara and Svalistana, but we can talk about just wanting to feel our feet on the earth, you know, like wanting to come back to just like being here in this moment. So I think for me that was for yin, like finding yin and finding a practice that took me out of doing, you know, because my previous practice was Ashtanga, which has levels and tiers, and you can win. You know, not that you can, but like it's quite a masculine practice I found, and yin was like,
yin is us.
I fucking
yin
hated
is
it,
feminine, isn't it?
At the beginning, I fucking hated it. I was like, this is horrible. Why would anyone do this to themselves? Like, I walked.
Oh, because it's so staunch, isn't it? It's just, it's like dictatorship almost.
Feel yourself. It's like, oh, this sucks. This really sucks. So anyway, so I mean, you teach teacher trainings, right? So people can come and work with you.
Yes.
In Melbourne?
In Melbourne, yeah. We've got one coming up, a 9-day intensive. It's really like a 9-day women's retreat of deep immersiveness into Chinese medicine, transformation, and, you know, really connecting back to ourselves. That's
Can anyone do this, or do you require like a prerequisite of teacher training or anything? Or
if you're working in the health field, yes, anyone that's working in as health practitioners can come along and do the courses. And of course, if you've done your 200-hour yoga teacher training or done some form of yin training, we normally have a screening process, and then we go through that, and we go from there.
Yeah.
So we've got 12 wonderful ladies for our next training. We've got an IVF specialist, which is really exciting because we're hoping to be able to then run some trials, because in Australia we're behind the 8 ball. In the States they've got all these evidence-based research supporting yoga, fertility, and so what we want to do is really change the scope of it here in Australia, the impact of mind-body medicine, meditation, yoga, and how that can improve fertility outcomes, because unfortunately Western medicine is all about numbers, and it's about the success of pregnancy numbers. So, you know, if we can improve that, but essentially create a collective for women. You know, if we can heal one woman, that has a ripple effect. It's like we are the drop in the ocean, and then that change, we're changing more women. That's more outreach, because we need it collectively. We need the healing.
Yay.
And then we've got a prenatal teacher training as well coming up in March as well, which is super exciting.
Yeah, and these are both on your website, right? Because I'll make some show notes for everyone to
that one's under mindful pregnancy.
Mindful
pregnancy training.
Okay, cool.
Everything else you can be found through Angia.
And your podcast, when does that start? Because I'm sure some of our listeners would love to hear that one.
That will be starting in March. We are starting off with a beautiful panel night for endometriosis awareness. And so we have a Western medicine doctor, we have an endo advocate, and myself will be talking on the panel. And so we're going to have a sort of question style evening about really kind of, you know, women suffering painful periods. It's not normal. So creating that awareness and education around that.
Because I mean, endo seems to be more and more. I certainly hear about it, and I don't know if it's just a diagnosis thing or if it's really maybe a lifestyle thing. Is it? I mean, does TCM have a view on endo? Because it'd sort of be it have something to do with inflammation and spleen and liver. Like there's
It does. I mean, we call it Benglol, which is means stagnation, deep stagnation of blood clots. But it comes down to there's the liver shear function, discharging function, and so from a TCM perspective, we know because the liver circulates around the reproductive organs that it's a liver issue, but it's more complex than that from a Western perspective. So for us, we do, like you were talking about having the heat in the lower dantian, is we do a lot of moxa in clinic because so many wombs are cold, and the moxa creates a beautiful flow, vascular blood flow through the reproductive organs, removing any blood stagnation, reducing inflammation, and mugwort is medicinal. It essentially
moxa is like a mugwort warming,
like an incense stick, or or you've got the others that you can place onto your belly.
So it's basically like a it's a little, it's obviously not invasive like acupuncture, but it creates a heat kind of reaction at the point, though. You're still using points when you apply it.
So we use it on specific acupuncture points, and then it has a beautiful radiating effect, so it reduces pain, stops pain, and it's key for creating, I mean, this is the thing, it comes back to, it's everything needs to be in flow, and that's the essence in Swadhisthana, and that's the essence, that water element, it's that fluidity. And so with conditions such as endo, things are stagnant, there's no energy moving, and when the period doesn't empty completely, it's like that retrograde flow, is that then it starts to form pockets of blood stagnation, and endometrial tissue, we know it then starts to grow with endometriosis on the outside of the uterus, the ovaries, and then it responds as the same way as when you're having your period. And so because the reason why is because the prostaglandins are elevated, and also too the way that our lining is it spirals. And so you've got these contractions as the lining's starting to shed, and so that's why you're sort of getting this increased pain, plus you've got the blood stagnation there previously. So it's I mean, you see women having nausea, having to take days off school, it's just no quality of life. But acupuncture, I have to say, acupuncture and Chinese medicine with the right sort of diet is amazing, and particularly herbs, because the herbs go back. They're specific on clearing blood stagnation, reducing inflammation. So there's lots of herbs that can do that.
That's awesome. Oh, you're doing good work. I feel like we could be here for all day. But,
thanks, lovely.
I'm quite aware that both of us have lives. So thank you so much for your time, Amanda. I'll create a big list of show notes for everybody to access, your site, your book, all of your resources, your trainings, opportunities to work with you. And I really appreciate everything you've shared. It's been a really enlightening and nourishing conversation. So
thanks, beautiful. Thank you so much.
No worries. Have a great day. Bye.
You too. Thanks. Bye.